The Galactic Council believed humanity was weak. For centuries, they watched the small species from afar, noting their slow progress, their petty wars, their fragile bodies. When the XL-Far Dominion proposed taking control of human colonies, the Council did not object. Why should they? Humanity was nothing more than an insignificant race struggling to survive in a vast and powerful galaxy. Grand Commander Vok of the XL-Far Dominion stood on the bridge of his warship, looking at the holographic display before him. The invasion had gone exactly as planned. 3 human colonies had fallen within days. The resistance had been laughable: small defense forces, outdated weapons, weak strategies. The humans had tried to fight, but they were nothing compared to the might of the Dominion. Pathetic, Vok muttered, watching the latest battle report. His officers chuckled, nodding in agreement. One of his lieutenants, a young XL-Far named Kren, stepped forward. "Grand Commander, our forces have secured the colony of Nuterra. The human forces have been eliminated." Vok smiled. "Good. Let this be a lesson to them. They should have accepted their place in the galaxy." Across the system, human distress signals were being ignored. The Galactic Council had already decided that no help would come. Humanity was alone, or so they thought. Deep in the void of space, beyond the range of XL-Far sensors, a fleet moved in silence. Massive warships, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, glided through the darkness. Their hulls were black, absorbing light. Their engines burned with controlled power, silent and deadly. This was no ordinary fleet. This was humanity's hidden strength, built in secret, waiting for the right moment to strike. On the bridge of the lead warship, Admiral James Carter stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tactical display. The XL-Far had no idea what was coming. "Status report," Carter said. A young officer, Lieutenant Harris, turned from her console. "The XL-Far forces have occupied Nuterra. Civilian casualties are high." "They think we're weak, sir." Carter's jaw tightened. They made a mistake. A deep silence filled the bridge. The crew had waited years for this moment. Humanity had been underestimated for too long. The Galactic Council ignored them. The XL-Far mocked them. Now, they would all learn the truth. "Bring us into position," Carter ordered. Across the fleet, weapons powered up. Shields activated. Engines roared to life. The time for hiding was over. Meanwhile, on Nuterra, the XL-Far soldiers marched through the ruined streets. Fires burned, smoke filled the air, and the scent of victory was everywhere. Kren walked beside his commander, feeling pride in their conquest. "These humans are weak," Kren said. "They have no real military strength. Their warships are old, their weapons outdated." Vok nodded. "We will take Earth next. The war will be over before it even begins." A sudden beeping interrupted their conversation. A XL-Far officer ran toward them, eyes wide with panic. "Grand Commander, we are detecting multiple ships entering the system." Vok frowned. "More human ships? They are no threat." "No, sir," the officer said, voice shaking. "These ships, they are different. They are massive, heavily armed, and they are heading straight for us." For the first time, doubt crept into Vok's mind. He turned to the sky, where the first flashes of light appeared. The stars seemed to shift, moving unnaturally. Then, one by one, the human warships emerged from the darkness. They were unlike anything the XL-Far had ever seen. Huge, armored, bristling with weapons. Their design was sleek, aggressive. These were not the fragile ships that XL-Far had destroyed days ago. These were war machines, built for one purpose: destruction. The first message from the human fleet came through all XL-Far channels. The voice was calm, but filled with cold fury. "This is Admiral James Carter of the United Earth Fleet. You have invaded our colonies. You have slaughtered our people. Now you will face the consequences." Silence followed. Then the first human warship opened fire. A massive energy blast tore through space, striking a sci-fi cruiser. The ship exploded instantly, breaking apart in a storm of fire and debris. Panic spread among the sci-fi forces. Vok watched in horror as more human ships fired, their weapons precise and devastating. Sci-fi vessels fell one after another, unable to withstand the sheer firepower of humanity's fleet. Kren stumbled backward. This cannot be happening. Vok's mind raced. The humans were supposed to be weak. This was impossible. And yet, before his eyes, his fleet was being torn apart like dry leaves in a storm. On the human flagship, Carter watched the battle unfold. He had given the XL-FAR a chance to surrender. They had refused. Now, they would pay the price. "Advance," he commanded. The human fleet surged forward, engines burning bright. The battle had only just begun. The XL-FAR fleet had no time to react. The first human warship, a massive dreadnought named Eagle's Fury, unleashed its deadly payload before they even had a chance to regroup. The blast from its main cannon struck the leading sci-fi cruiser with a force so powerful it ripped through the hull as if it were paper. The explosion lit up the darkness of space, and the XL-FAR ship was instantly torn apart, debris scattering in all directions. Admiral James Carter stood on the bridge of the Eagle's Fury, watching the destruction unfold. His hands remained steady on the control panel, his eyes fixed on the screen. He'd known this day would come, but nothing could prepare him for the satisfaction of seeing humanity's fleet finally strike back. The XL-FAR commanders on the bridge of their flagship, Vorker's Wrath, were momentarily frozen in disbelief. The humans had appeared out of nowhere, massive ships with weapons that seemed beyond anything they had ever encountered. They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to have nothing but old, outdated technology. Yet, here they were, their warships tearing through the XL-FAR lines with terrifying efficiency. "Impossible," growled Vok, the XL-FAR Grand Commander. His claws gripped the railing as he watched his fleet crumble. How can they have this much firepower? The lieutenant beside him swallowed hard. "I don't know, sir. Their weapons are unlike anything we've seen. We can't stop them." "Send the signal to the rest of the fleet," Vok ordered, his voice low with fury. "We will not retreat. We will destroy them." But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at him. He had underestimated humanity. His empire had underestimated humanity. On the Eagle's Fury, Admiral Carter didn't flinch as the battle raged around him. He knew that this was just the beginning. His fleet was still outnumbered, but humanity's ships were more advanced, more powerful, and now they were showing the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. "We're reading incoming enemy fire," shouted Lieutenant Harris. "Their ships are targeting us." Carter didn't hesitate. "Activate the shields. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The ship shook as a volley of plasma blasts streaked past them. Eagle's Fury swerved and dodged with remarkable speed. The ship's advanced maneuvering thrusters allowed it to weave through the incoming fire, barely escaping the deadly beams. "Return fire," Carter commanded, his voice calm but resolute. Another wave of energy blasts shot from the Eagle's Fury, and once again, XL-FAR ships disintegrated in a flash of light. The battle was now in full swing, and the tide was turning quickly. The XL-FAR ships were faster, but their weapons were no match for the strength of the human fleet's artillery. The Eagle's Fury locked onto the XL-FAR flagship, Vorker's Wrath, and fired a concentrated energy beam directly at its shields. The XL-FAR flagship flinched as its shields flared, but it held for only a moment. A second blast from the human ship tore through the shields and struck the flagship's outer hull. A ripple of shockwaves spread across the XL-FAR vessel, sending a shudder through the ship. Inside Vorker's Wrath, the XL-FAR crew were thrown into chaos. Sparks flew from consoles as their shields failed, and the hull began to buckle. Vok slammed his fist onto the console in front of him. "We need reinforcements now," he barked. call for backup from the nearest system. But it was too late. The humans were relentless. Their warships seemed to multiply in number, emerging from the blackness of space like shadows. More Excel-far ships fell to the might of human firepower. The energy beams from the human fleet were cutting through the Excel-far armada like a hot knife through butter. Back on the Eagle's Fury, Carter's crew worked tirelessly, keeping the ship in constant motion, dodging incoming fire while responding with even more destructive force. He could hear the hum of the weapon systems as they reloaded, the deep growl of the ship's engines as they accelerated to full speed. "Target the Excel-far flagship," Carter ordered again, his voice even more commanding now. "We're finishing this." The Eagle's Fury lined up for a final shot, its main cannon charged and ready. The human fleet watched as the beam gathered energy, its destructive potential immense. Vok and his officers on Vorker's Wrath could only watch helplessly as the beam of light streaked toward them. With a deafening roar, the shot struck the flagship's central core. The ship seemed to explode in slow motion, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The shockwaves spread across the Excel-far fleet, and the light from the explosion illuminated the entire battle. For a moment, everything was silent. The once mighty flagship was gone, reduced to nothing more than floating debris. "Goodbye, Vok," Carter muttered under his breath. He had known this was coming, but even he couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching it unfold. The Excel-far had made the mistake of underestimating humanity. Now, they were paying for it. But Carter didn't celebrate. This was just the beginning. The battle was still far from over. The Excel-far had lost their flagship, but their empire was far from defeated. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of. But now, the real war had begun, and they would be ready. The destruction of Vorker's Wrath sent shockwaves through the Excel-far fleet. It was an unprecedented blow. Their pride, their flagship, reduced to cosmic rubble in a single strike. The remaining Excel-far warships floundered, confused, struggling to regroup, their once unified command fractured in a split second. But it wasn't over yet. Admiral Carter stood at the center of the battle's control room, his mind sharp as a blade. The battle was far from won, and every human warship had to be in perfect harmony. "This is our moment," he murmured to himself, then turned to his crew. "Hold steady. Do not let up. We press forward. Keep the pressure on them." The Eagle's Fury fired once more, its massive energy cannon charging up again. The Excel-far, stunned by their first true defeat, were disoriented, but not out of the fight. They were regrouping, rallying the remnants of their fleet in a desperate attempt to retaliate. Excel-far warships moved into position, their hulls glowing with the readiness of their weapons. "We've got incoming fire," shouted Lieutenant Harris. "Several enemy ships are locking onto us." "We can take it," Carter replied with unshaken resolve. "Hold position. Focus on their weak points." The Excel-far had learned quickly that they couldn't engage the human fleet head-on and expect victory. They had to regroup, reform, and pick their shots carefully. But they hadn't fully understood the capabilities of the human ships. The humans weren't only technologically superior, they were relentless. As Carter gave the order to target the rear ships in the Excel-far formation, a plan began to form in his mind. The Excel-far might be strong, but they had never faced an enemy like this before. They were used to overwhelming lesser races with sheer numbers and brute force. But humanity had the one thing they lacked: unity. On the bridge of the Eagle's Fury, Carter's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the situation. The Excel-far had regrouped into a defensive circle, their ships moving in tight formation. But it was clear to him that they were already too late. Humanity's fleet was starting to surround them, closing in from all sides. And in the vastness of space, where only one side could rule, the Excel-far were being outclassed. "Fire at will," Carter ordered, his voice cold and commanding. The human warships opened fire, their weapons hammering into the XL-FAR formations with brutal efficiency. The XL-FAR ships tried to return fire, but their shots either missed or were absorbed by the humans' advanced shields. One by one, XL-FAR warships exploded into the void, their engines flaring brightly before they disintegrated into cosmic dust. The remnants of the XL-FAR fleet scattered, trying to flee in disarray. A massive XL-FAR cruiser, one of the last in the fleet, turned toward the Eagle's Fury, its weapons lighting up with deadly energy. "We're locked onto their primary weapon system," Lieutenant Harris warned, her voice shaking slightly from the tension. But Carter didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on the screen as the cruiser's weapons charged. "Braced for impact," he said calmly. The XL-FAR ship fired first, sending a powerful blast straight toward the Eagle's Fury. It hit the shields with a force that rattled the crew, but the advanced human technology held firm. Carter didn't hesitate. His hand moved swiftly across the console. "Counterattack," he shouted. A moment later, the Eagle's Fury unleashed its own devastating salvo, a barrage of energy weapons that tore through the XL-FAR cruiser's shields. The human weapons seemed to cut through the XL-FAR ship like it was made of paper. The cruiser exploded in a violent flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the surrounding space. But even as their fleet crumbled, the XL-FAR refused to admit defeat. They still had one weapon up their sleeve, an experimental weapon developed in the deepest shadows of their empire. It was their final trump card. The signal came through, a frantic message broadcast across the human fleet. "Emergency. Activate all shields. Prepare for a full-scale counterattack. The Omega Protocol has been initiated." Carter's eyes widened as he saw a massive object emerge from the center of the XL-FAR fleet. A massive space station, one that dwarfed even the largest human warships. It was equipped with a weapon unlike anything they had ever encountered, a massive energy cannon capable of obliterating entire planets. "Target the weapon," Carter shouted. "We can't let them fire that thing." The human fleet immediately adjusted their positions, focusing all their energy on the newly revealed station. But the XL-FAR had one advantage. The station was heavily shielded, and it was protected by a wall of ships. The human warships had to break through a defensive line first, before they could even get close. "Give them everything we've got," Carter commanded. The Eagle's Fury aimed its guns, firing with precise strikes, its weapons illuminating the darkness of space with each shot. The XL-FAR ships fought back fiercely, but the human fleet was unrelenting. The space station's energy cannon hummed to life, a deep, threatening sound that reverberated through the battlefield. The humans knew they didn't have much time. One shot from that cannon could destroy their entire fleet. The battle raged on. The humans' advanced tactics and superior technology pushed the XL-FAR back. But the XL-FAR weren't done yet. As the two forces collided once again, the stars around them seemed to burn brighter, a sign of the struggle for supremacy unfolding in the vast expanse of the galaxy. "Keep pushing forward," Carter urged his crew. "We cannot let them use that weapon. We have to end this now." And so, the battle continued, each side fighting with everything they had. The humans had shown the XL-FAR the might of their fleet, but the XL-FAR were determined to survive. In the cold, infinite reaches of space, there would only be one victor, and neither side was willing to back down. The battle was far from over. Despite the rapid devastation of their fleet, the XL-FAR had proven one thing. They weren't going to simply bow to defeat. As the Eagle's Fury and the other human ships advanced, they could see the remnants of the XL-FAR forces rallying around a colossal space station. The station was unlike anything the humans had encountered, a massive fortress, bristling with weapons and shield generators that could withstand even the most powerful blows. Admiral Carter paced on the bridge of the Eagle's Fury, his mind racing. The XL-FAR weren't just trying to escape. They were preparing to make their final stand. And the Omega Protocol they had activated was a last-ditch weapon designed for one thing: destruction. "Lieutenant Harris, what's our status?" Carter asked, his voice sharp and commanding. Harris turned from her console, her face tense. "The XL-FAR space station is fully operational, sir. It's charging its main weapon, a planet-killing cannon. If we don't disable it, they could wipe out our entire fleet in one shot." Carter nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Then we have no choice. We have to take that station down before it fires." He turned to the rest of his crew, issuing orders swiftly. The human warships shifted positions, locking into formation, preparing to breach the defensive perimeter surrounding the XL-FAR station. This would be their most dangerous mission yet. No one could afford to hesitate. "Prepare to fire," Carter said calmly, even though his heart was pounding. "Focus all firepower on their shield generators. We can't let them fire that weapon." As the fleet began to move into position, the XL-FAR on their station watched in silent anticipation. The moment the humans tried to make their move, the station would unleash its devastating energy cannon. The XL-FAR fleet, although decimated, had managed to hold the humans at bay with their defensive fire. "We will see if humanity's arrogance is enough to overcome our final defense," Vok growled to himself, watching the human fleet advance. Despite his anger, there was an unmistakable edge of fear in his voice. He knew this would be their final chance. Across the dark expanse of space, the human warships pushed forward. Their advanced targeting systems locked onto the shield generators surrounding the XL-FAR space station. Carter's orders were clear. The Eagle's Fury would lead the charge, with the other warships providing support. The first shots rang out. Beams of concentrated energy blasted toward the XL-FAR shields, striking the outer layers with brutal precision. The XL-FAR shields flared brightly as they absorbed the blows, but it was clear that they were weakening. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Harris called out, her voice filled with relief. "The shield generators are starting to buckle." Carter clenched his fists. "Keep pushing. We're not stopping until that cannon is offline." The human fleet fired in unison, their weapons cutting through the space like a torrent of destruction. Each blast from the Eagle's Fury caused the XL-FAR shields to flicker, creating brief openings for the other ships to exploit. One by one, the XL-FAR warships fell as they failed to hold their ground against the human onslaught. But the station's defenses were still strong, and the Omega Protocol was nearing completion. "We've almost got it," Harris called out, excitement in her voice. "The shields are down to 20%. The XL-FAR weren't done yet. In a final desperate attempt to defend their station, they launched a counterattack. Swarms of fighter ships and defensive drones erupted from the station's docking bays, zipping through the vacuum of space with deadly intent. The human warships engaged them in a ferocious dogfight, energy beams lighting up the dark expanse as both sides clashed. Carter's mind raced. The drones were fast and nimble, but they weren't enough to turn the tide. The real threat was still the station and its weapon. If the Omega Protocol was completed, everything they had fought for would be in vain. "Target their weapon systems," Carter ordered. "We need to destroy the cannon before they can fire it." The Eagle's Fury veered sharply to the right, dodging incoming fire from the XL-FAR drones. The ship's weapons unleashed a barrage of focused energy, striking the heart of the space station. One of the larger weapons arrays exploded, but the Omega Protocol cannon was still intact. "Shields are holding, sir," Harris reported, though there was a note of urgency in her voice. "We're taking heavy damage from the drones. We need to neutralize their defense grid now." The Eagle's Fury fired again, this time directly at the massive cannon of the XL-FAR station. The blast struck the weapon, but the station's shielding absorbed most of the energy. The cannon was still operational, but its targeting system was now malfunctioning. It was a small victory, but not enough to guarantee survival. Carter's eyes narrowed as he watched the situation unfold. The XL-FAR were losing ground, but they were still determined to fight. He couldn't let them have a chance to fire. He had to finish this once and for all. "Bring us closer," Carter ordered, his voice steely. "We need to hit them with everything we've got." The Eagle's Fury surged forward, its engines pushing it toward the space station. With a roar, the massive warship came within range of the Salfar station's cannon. The other human ships followed, their guns blazing as they provided cover fire. "Lock all weapons on the cannon," Carter commanded. One final shot. The ship's energy systems whined as they fired every available weapon at the heart of the Salfar station. The blast hit with the force of 1,000 suns. A massive shockwave spread out through the station, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The Salfar cannon was destroyed in a cataclysmic explosion, the shockwave shattering the station's remaining shields. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The station was dead. The Salfar's final weapon, their last hope for victory, had been obliterated. Carter stood motionless on the bridge, watching the aftermath. The battle wasn't over yet, but humanity had taken the first real step toward victory. The Salfar had underestimated them before, and now they had paid the price. But Carter knew there would be more challenges ahead. The Salfar might be down, but they were not out. And as the last of their fleet scattered, the human fleet prepared for the inevitable final push. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's message had just begun. The destruction of the Omega Protocol was a hard-fought victory, but it was only a small part of the larger war. The Salfar had been dealt a significant blow, their most powerful weapon destroyed, but they were not yet broken. The humans had struck, and the Salfar would undoubtedly regroup, licking their wounds, and they would return. But for now, the battlefield was theirs. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Eagle's Fury, gazing at the swirling remnants of the Salfar fleet. It had been a fierce battle, but victory was not guaranteed yet. The Salfar had learned their lesson, and Carter knew they would adapt, regrouping and coming back stronger than before. "Status report," Carter ordered, his voice even but firm. "Sir, the remaining Salfar forces are retreating," Lieutenant Harris said, her eyes glued to the tactical screen. "Most of their fleet is either destroyed or in full retreat. We've neutralized their immediate threat." Carter nodded, but there was no joy in his expression. "They'll be back. They'll regroup and come at us again. This isn't over yet." Harris looked up, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What's the next move, sir?" Carter stared at the stars beyond, the endless expanse of space that lay between them and their enemies. The Salfar might have been powerful, but humanity had proven something they never expected, that they could stand against the might of an empire and fight back with relentless determination. "Prepare the fleet for pursuit," Carter ordered. "We need to follow them. We can't afford to let them regroup. If they return to their home systems, it could mean a longer war. We're not waiting around for them to come back stronger." The fleet moved swiftly, now focused on hunting down the remnants of the Salfar. The human ships were relentless, their coordination and discipline making them a formidable force in the void of space. But as they advanced, Carter couldn't shake the feeling of something watching them, something larger and more ominous than they had yet encountered. The deeper they ventured into the Salfar-controlled space, the darker and more dangerous the territory seemed. The stars were distant, and the surrounding space was eerily quiet. There were no other ships, no signs of life, only the haunting silence of a once thriving empire now battered and broken. "We're entering Salfar space, sir," Harris reported. "I'm picking up faint signals, communications relays scattered across the system." Carter's expression grew harder. "It's a trap. They're trying to lure us in." Harris glanced at him, unsure. "Should we pull back, sir?" Carter shook his head. "No, we keep moving forward, but we stay alert. If the Salfar are trying to lead us into a trap, they've made a grave mistake." The fleet advanced cautiously. Every officer aboard the ships was on edge, scanning the stars for any sign of movement. The silence stretched on, And then, just as Carter had predicted, the trap was sprung. A massive XL-FAR warship emerged from the shadows of a nearby asteroid belt, its sleek black hull barely visible against the backdrop of space. It was enormous, larger than any ship they had encountered so far. Behind it, several smaller ships dropped out of warp, forming up in a tight formation. The XL-FAR weren't done yet. They had returned with a vengeance. "Battle stations," Carter shouted. "All ships, prepare for engagement. Focus fire on the large ship first. We can't let them regroup any further." The human fleet moved into formation, but the XL-FAR warship was already unleashing its weapons. Plasma bolts erupted from the ship, lighting up the void as they slammed into the human ships. The force of the impact shook the Eagle's Fury, and Carter's crew scrambled to stabilize the ship. Shields holding at 40%. Lieutenant Harris called, her hands working frantically at her console. "Not good enough," Carter muttered. "Push the shields to maximum. Return fire." The Eagle's Fury fired back, its massive weapons systems roaring to life. Energy blasts tore through the XL-FAR warship's outer shields, but the ship was tough, its design engineered for prolonged combat. The XL-FAR were clearly prepared for a drawn-out battle, but humanity wasn't going to let them dictate the terms of the fight. The human fleet engaged the XL-FAR warship with everything they had. Smaller ships darted in and out, using their superior agility to avoid the XL-FAR's powerful fire, while the larger warships focused their fire on the enemy flagship. But the XL-FAR had one advantage: their tactical knowledge. They had been through countless battles, and their ability to adapt in real time was something the humans had yet to match. As the Eagle's Fury moved into closer range, the XL-FAR flagship launched a barrage of smaller fighter ships, swarming like a cloud of wasps around the human ships. The smaller human vessels engaged the fighters, trying to keep them at bay while the larger ships continued to focus on the flagship. Carter clenched his fists as he watched the chaos unfold on the bridge. "Focus all fire on the flagship's command center. If we disable it, they won't be able to coordinate their forces." The human ships turned their fire on the flagship's core. A series of brutal shots tore through the flagship's outer defenses, and the XL-FAR flagship staggered, a massive chunk of its hull rupturing. For a brief moment, the XL-FAR fleet seemed to hesitate, but then they retaliated with renewed fury. "We're taking heavy damage," Harris reported. "Their fighter ships are overwhelming our smaller craft. We need reinforcements." "Hold your ground," Carter said, his voice steely. "We're not retreating. The XL-FAR will learn the price of underestimating humanity." The battle escalated as the human fleet took more hits, but Carter's resolve was unwavering. This wasn't just about defeating the XL-FAR fleet. It was about sending a message. Humanity would never be cowed, never be defeated. They would fight to the end, no matter the odds. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on the scanners, a faint but unmistakable transmission. "It's a distress signal," Harris said, tapping her console. "From a nearby system. It's human." Carter's eyes widened. "A human colony. Is it possible?" The signal was weak, barely detectable, but it was enough to change everything. If a human colony was still alive in XL-FAR space, then this was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a fight for something greater. "Move us to that location," Carter ordered. "We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting to reclaim what is ours." The human fleet, battered but determined, changed course, heading toward the distress signal. The XL-FAR would have to wait. This new mission would be the turning point, not just for this war, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. The stakes had never been higher, and the time for hesitation had passed. The Eagle's Fury surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the silence of space, heading toward the unknown location of the distress signal. The fleet followed closely behind, maintaining their formation, though every ship was now brimming with tension. This mission had become something greater than a mere retaliation against the XL-FAR. It was a beacon of hope, a chance to reclaim what had been lost. Humanity's determination was now laser-focused. They had no time to waste. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the vastness of space. His mind raced. Who had sent the distress signal? Was it a trap, another attempt to lure them into the clutches of the XLFAR? Or was it something more, something that could turn the tide of the war in their favor? Lieutenant Harris, any more data on the distress signal? Carter asked, his voice low but filled with intensity. Harris, her fingers flying over the console, looked up. We're still too far out for detailed analysis, sir. The signal is weak, almost like it's been bouncing off some kind of interference, but I'm tracing it. We're closing in fast. Good. Keep me updated. We can't afford to get caught off guard. Carter paused, his eyes narrowing. If this is a trap, we'll make them regret it. But if it's real, it could be a human colony in Telfar space. Harris finished for him, her face tense with realization. Carter nodded. Exactly. We've already lost so much. If a colony is still alive, we can't let the Telfar destroy it. We need to get there. Now. The fleet continued to accelerate, the stars outside flickering as they shot past. But even as the ships moved forward with purpose, the oppressive silence of space seemed to weigh down on the crew. Carter could feel the pressure mounting. They were heading into unknown territory, and every decision they made would determine the course of the war. Hours passed as they closed in on the signal source. The area surrounding the distress signal was eerie, an empty sector of space that seemed to swallow all light. No ships, no signs of life, only the occasional asteroid or debris field floating in the void. The XLFAR had obviously been through here, either scouring the area for any signs of rebellion, or simply ensuring that no survivors could escape. Then, suddenly, Harris's voice cut through the stillness. "Sir, I've got a visual. There's something ahead." The bridge crew turned their attention to the massive screen before them. The blackness of space was punctuated by the faint outline of a structure, something huge, far larger than any human-made space station. It looked ancient, its metal surfaces pitted and scarred, as though it had been through centuries of conflict. But it was human, a remnant from an earlier, long-lost colony. This was the place. "Is it operational?" Carter asked, already knowing the answer. It couldn't be. If it was, it would be broadcasting a stronger signal, not a weak distress call. Harris scanned the station. "It appears to be mostly dormant, but I'm detecting some faint power readings. It's still functioning, but barely. Bring us in close. Let's see what we're dealing with," Carter ordered. The fleet closed in on the station, their weapons systems ready, though Carter didn't want to fight. He just wanted answers. What had happened here? Why was this station still alive? And who was left to send a distress signal? The station was silent as the human ships docked. The crew moved quickly to prepare for the unknown. If there were survivors, they would be found here, but the risk of Telfar ambush was high. Carter gave the order for a ground team to be ready for any situation. He didn't trust the quiet. It was too calm, too still. His gut told him something was off, but he had no choice but to proceed. "We'll send in a reconnaissance team first," Carter said, his voice calm but sharp. "Lieutenant Harris, you'll be in charge of the ground crew. Prepare for anything." The crew nodded, the tension in the room thick. Harris turned to gather her team. The men and women who would accompany her had all seen their fair share of battle. This wouldn't be an easy mission, but they had no choice. Humanity had to survive. As the team made their way to the airlocks, Carter watched them leave. His eyes lingered on the massive structure before them. What had happened to this colony? Had it been forgotten, abandoned, or had it been destroyed by the XLFAR? If there were survivors, they would need medical aid, supplies, and protection. But Carter had a deeper concern. If this station had been hiding away from the XLFAR for this long, what other secrets could it hold? The sound of the airlock doors closing echoed through the ship. The team was preparing to step onto the station, but Carter's mind was already racing ahead. He knew this mission could change everything. If they found survivors, it would be the first real victory in this war. If they didn't, if it was a trap, humanity could face its darkest days yet. The team deployed to the surface of the station, moving cautiously through the cold, silent corridors. The station was old, its metal walls coated with a fine layer of dust. But the signs of life were unmistakable. There were faint, flickering lights, barely operational. Something, or someone, had been trying to keep the station running. "Stay alert," Harris instructed her team as they moved deeper into the station. The low hum of the power systems was the only sound they could hear, punctuated by the occasional clink of boots on metal floors. They moved quickly, checking rooms and halls, their weapons drawn. The station had been deserted for too long. This much was clear. But there were signs of activity, scattered supplies, discarded tools, and faint footprints in the dust. Someone had been here recently. And then, just as Harris reached the central control room, she found it. A room filled with old computer terminals and blinking lights. But there, in the corner of the room, was something she hadn't expected. A small group of people. Humans. Survivors. The team froze. These survivors, however few they were, had made it through everything the XL-FAR had thrown at them. Harris could hardly believe it. She stepped forward, cautiously, calling out to them. "Is anyone there?" A figure emerged from the shadows, a man wearing a tattered uniform. His face was gaunt, and his eyes betrayed the weariness of someone who had lived through a hellish ordeal. "We never thought anyone would come," the man said, his voice shaky but full of gratitude. "The XL-FAR, they left us here to die." Harris nodded slowly. "You're safe now. We're here to help." It was a small victory, but one that filled the crew with hope. The survivors had kept the flame of humanity alive in the heart of XL-FAR space, and now, with their help, the tide of war could begin to turn. The survivors were more than just a group of lost souls. They were a beacon of resilience. Carter had hoped for the best, but the sight of these men and women, tired and battered, gave him a new sense of purpose. This small band of humans had not only survived against impossible odds, but had maintained a spirit that was undying. This moment was more than just a turning point. It was a rebirth for humanity's war effort. The survivors, though a ragtag group, had a wealth of knowledge. They had lived through the XL-FAR invasion and understood their tactics better than anyone in the human fleet. They had managed to hide in plain sight, their station camouflaged by debris and asteroid fields. But it had been a fragile existence, a life on the edge of a knife, always waiting for the next attack, the next wave of destruction. Carter's mind was already racing with possibilities. These survivors could provide the critical intelligence they needed to shift the tide of the war. The XL-FAR had made a grave mistake in thinking humanity weak. The survival of this station was proof of that. And now the humans had something to fight for, a reason to bring the war to the XL-FAR's doorstep. But first, they needed to secure this station, give it the resources it had been lacking, and prepare for the next phase. The survivors were carefully brought aboard the Eagle's Fury, where the medical team went to work. The human fleet remained alert, watching the edges of XL-FAR space as they began to regroup. The information gathered from the survivors was invaluable. Detailed accounts of XL-FAR movements, weaknesses in their fleet strategies, and even hints at the locations of key installations. The survivors weren't just a symbol of hope. They were the key to humanity's next steps in the war. While the survivors rested and recovered, Carter convened with his senior officers. They had to act quickly. The longer they stayed in XL-FAR space, the more dangerous it became. The XL-FAR had undoubtedly sent word of their presence, and more reinforcements could be on the way. Time was a luxury they no longer had. "We can't just wait for them to come to us," Carter said, pacing the command room. "We need to take the fight to them. Strike fast and hit hard. The XL-FAR are disorganized right now, but they'll regroup. If we let them rebuild, We're giving them a second chance to wipe us out." Lieutenant Harris nodded. "The survivors told us about their weapon caches. There are hidden sci-fi supply stations scattered around this region. We can hit them hard and disrupt their supplies." "Good," Carter said. "We hit their supply lines, cripple their ability to fight back, and keep them on their heels. We use this momentum to gain the upper hand. Once we've crippled their fleet enough, we'll have an opening to strike at their command center." The plan was risky, but it was the best chance they had. The Eagle's Fury and the rest of the human fleet prepared for their next mission. With the survivors' intel, the human fleet was able to track down key sci-fi supply depots. The attack was swift and devastating. The humans moved like shadows, using their knowledge of the enemy's tactics to outmaneuver them at every turn. The XL-FAR, still reeling from their earlier defeat, were caught off guard. The battle raged through the asteroid fields, where the XL-FAR had hidden their resources. The human ships darted in and out, striking with precision. Explosions lit up the cold darkness of space as XL-FAR supply ships and stations were obliterated. But the fight wasn't over. The humans' victory, while significant, had not broken the XL-FAR completely. Carter stood on the bridge, watching as the human fleet tore through enemy lines. He felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the grim reality that the XL-FAR were not an enemy that would be easily defeated. Each victory brought new challenges. The XL-FAR had learned from their mistakes and were adapting. Their fleets were regrouping, and they were beginning to push back. But this time, it would be different. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Carter said to his crew. "We're fighting for our future. For the survival of humanity. We will not bow to these invaders." The crew's resolve was evident in their eyes. They had fought through the darkest days of the war, and now they were on the brink of something bigger. The XL-FAR had underestimated them. They thought humanity was weak, but they were wrong. Humanity had a fire inside them, a fire that could not be extinguished. And with each victory, each battle fought, they were proving that the XL-FAR's mistake was their downfall. But even as Carter felt a sense of triumph, the war was far from over. The XL-FAR were coming, and they would not give up easily. They would throw everything they had at humanity, but Carter knew one thing for sure: they would never break. The human spirit, tempered by war and hardship, was stronger than any enemy they faced. The fleet continued its advance, moving deeper into enemy territory. The survivors aboard the Eagle's Fury had given them a glimpse of hope. The XL-FAR had underestimated humanity's ability to endure, and now the tide was turning. The first wave of humanity's war for freedom had begun, and it would not end until the XL-FAR were driven out of the galaxy for good. With the survivors' knowledge, the strength of their fleet, and the unwavering spirit of humanity driving them, Admiral Carter knew that they were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim their place in the galaxy, to show the universe that humanity would never be broken, no matter the odds. This was only the beginning. The XL-FAR would learn, just as every other enemy before them had, humanity was not weak, and they would pay the price for underestimating them.